Hello, this is Gerard Perry of American Rattlesnake, and today we'll be interviewing Michael Malice, celebrity co-author, cable news pundit, and fashion plate. But first off, we're going to be discussing his newest book, Dear Reader, the Unauthorized Autobiography of Jong Il. Now, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with communist memoirs or the memoirs of communist despots, but as someone who's read a few of them, I can say that it's not the most appealing reading. To take just one example, Enver Hoxha, the former dictator of Albania who famously abolished religion, wrote a book entitled With Stalin, and it was virtually unreadable for me, at least. So this concept, having a quote-unquote memoir written by a notorious Marxist despot, how did you make that palatable to the general public? How did you do this?
Well, that was probably one of the biggest challenges I've ever had to do because, I write books for celebrities, so I sit down and I work with them to create their narrative. But in the case of Jong Il, I went to North Korea and I adapted their propaganda. Slogging through those books, I can confirm what you said, is horrifying because it's almost designed to destroy your critical thought. It's designed to destroy any concept of entertainment or fun. So it's really tedious and really boring. And I thought, okay, I have to make these stories and anecdotes not only palatable, but actually funny and entertaining for the layman, so that by reading my book, they're going to, understand North Korea and at the same time not want to jump off a bridge. So how do I do it? I could not have done it if this was my first book. This was my sixth or seventh. So I guess it's just a function of, when you've done it enough times, it's a big challenge for me. But it's very hard to explain, but it's just, having a good sense of pacing and presenting the absurdity on face value. With them, when absurdity is presented, it's kind of mind-numbing, but here it renders itself very farcical. When you have Jong Il at age 10 taking apart a car and putting it back together by himself to learn how automobiles work, there it's proof of his intelligence. Here it's proof of his insanity. Yeah.
That's something else that's very curious because, as you know, the interview has attracted a lot of attention, and something that I thought an interesting observation about that was how it was subversive in the most elemental sense, because this is a thought system, the Juche thought system and the Kim dynasty, that doesn't accept humor at all. But it's not just the North Korean system. Any sort of hermetic thought system tries to make itself impervious to humor. They don't accept humor at all, which is why whenever I hear about funny Muslim comedians, it's usually someone who's less funny than Whitney Cummings. It's just any sort of system where you have to stand in abeyance of a larger deity doesn't seem that receptive to humor. And I take it that it's the same in North Korea, that you're not allowed to mock or jest about anything and have to accept it at face value. Otherwise, you're susceptible to all sorts of repercussions, from being imprisoned to being murdered.
Well, I think it's probably universal in every society. In every country, you're going to have things that are revered and held above mockery. I don't think that's always a bad thing. I mean, the 9/11 jokes, Joan Rivers had her joke, the week of, she got asked by a reporter for an interview, and she goes, "Do you want to meet at Windows on the Ground?" And that's funny in retrospect, but at the same time, I can see how, a widow whose husband was in those towers, it would be like, too soon, Joan. So I think that, there's a time and a place for humor, but, North Korea and these dictators, it's not so much that they have a contempt for humor, but they lack a sense of irony. Because when you have irony and you're realizing looking at these stories, it's not that it's humor that's dangerous. It's irony when you have a human being be presented as being able to change the weather. And the irony, one of the stories I have in my book is, Kim Jong Il is the greatest man ever, and he's just amazing. And she'll show up at the architects meeting, and these are the best architects in North Korea ostensibly, and they're building the Tower of the Juche idea, and they have some plans, and he goes, let's make it taller. We want this to be the tallest tower in the world. And they're all shocked, and they say, none of us ever considered such a thing. Now, these are the best architects in North Korea. Even ostensibly in a brainstorming session, you don't think any of them threw it out there. And of course they haven't, because to make himself look brilliant, everyone else in the country has to effectively be learning disabled. So once you deconstruct it in that sense, you realize, just how much there is of smiling and nodding, and how little opportunity there is for questioning anything that's being told to you.
And there's no samizdat. There's no count. It's not even equivalent to, say, Cuba or other communist dictatorships where you have a dissident culture, because the moment you dissent, you're exiled internally to essentially a death camp, if not a slow motion death camp, which is the labor camps.
That's not entirely accurate, as I recently learned. So they have something called Sonbong, which is your caste system. You're giving a rating, basically a credit rating, that determines how loyal you are to the regime from 1 to 51. And that tells you whether you go to college, what kind of job you could have, and where you live. So the people with the bad Sonbong are all localized to the Northeast, because when you have a low loyalty rating, you're not allowed near major cities or the ocean, which leaves the Northeast. Now, these people, since they're all kind of localized, they are much more contemptuous of the regime and kind of whisper among themselves. And in fact, I met a refugee from there, and she was asking me, did Kim Jong Il kill Kim Il Sung? Whereas when I met another refugee from Pyongyang, her experience was very different, because the people in the Northeast, it's kind of like their version of Detroit. It's the slums. They know they're the lowest of the low, so they don't have this great reverence. Whereas people in Pyongyang, your ability to step foot in that city is just determined by how well you at least parrot loyalty to the regime. So there is that little bit of dissident, but it's geographically based, I would say.
So it's essentially a caste. It's a caste system.
Correct.
Well, that brings me to my next point, which is I wanted to get your thoughts on the recent revelations about Shin Dong-hyuk, the famous escapee from North Korea, who he recently revealed that he wasn't. Well, just for a little background, he wrote a book called Inside Camp 14.
Escape from Camp 14.
I'm sorry. I stand corrected. Escape from Camp 14, where he described his life inside of being born inside of a total control zone, which was where people who have no hope for ever being released into North Korean society are kept. They're not taught. It's the worst possible situation you could find yourself in. Multiple generations are live there, and they don't have any hope of being leaving, essentially. And it was recently revealed that he wasn't born inside of Camp 14. It was Camp 18, which is a less restrictive environment, and people are eventually released. And this has occasioned a large discussion about what the ramifications of this revelation, these revelations are. Whether the North Korean regime will be able to exploit this to say, hey, we told you that these dissidents are all liars and mischief makers, and that you can't trust them, and they can use it essentially to dismiss the legitimate criticism of one of the worst regimes on the planet. So what do you think about that?
Well, the North Korean regime, is very much invested in the idea that anyone who's speaking out against them is a liar or is a puppet. They love that word, either a puppet of the U.S. imperialists or the South Korean, who are themselves puppets of the U.S. imperialists. So there was an author recently, Susie Kim, who came out with a book called "Without You, There Is No Us," because she was a teacher there for several months, and one of the things she discussed was the morality of writing about North Korea, because people you write about, they're all still there. And the North Korean regime is particularly pernicious in that if they can't get to you, they're going to get to your family and your relatives, and they will suffer the consequences that you can't. So there are certainly a great many reasons for someone who's an escapee to change their story, or at least change the details. I wrote about my trip to North Korea for Reason magazine, and I, kind of fudged many details for this specific reason. I talked about my tour guide, and she's still there, and I don't need her getting into trouble. So I mean, these are all, everyone in that country is a hostage with a gun to their head at all times. So I don't know that where he's born is really that relevant. We have footage of these camps. We have testimony from very many different people whose stories all match up. So, and frankly, even if these camps didn't exist, which I would hope would be the best thing ever, you still have 25 million slaves who are, where food is, in a nation where food is being used as a mechanism of social control. So there is plenty of, even if the camps vanished, North Korea would still be the most brutal, evil place on earth.
And it should be noted that he even in his, the memoir his memoir, he admits that he didn't always tell the truth. It doesn't paint him in a beatific light,
right?
Especially with regard to what he did, because his parents were killed, and his own.
Well, his mom and his brother.
His mom and his brother, and his own, if you want to term it complicity, or his responsibility for that. Even he admits that he dissembled when he was first revealed to the West. So I don't think he's ever portrayed himself as a flawless human being in that regard. His main point was he's just trying to expose the perniciousness of the Kim dynasty.
And it's not, I mean, they don't have a leg to stand on, because it is not factual, as they claim, that when Jong Il visited Moscow, that the weather changed. And even if the weather did change when he visited Moscow, it is absolutely not the fact that the Russians referred to him as, quote, the man who brings sunshine. So when they make these claims with a straight face and then say, well, this other guy's lying, I mean, we have it in print. Their lies are, that Kim Il-sung single-handedly won, both the World War II and the Korean War. I mean, this is the base of their mythology, which is, demonstrably false.
Yeah, I agree. It does seem a tad hypocritical to level allegations of lying when your entire the edifice of your political system is based to almost wholly on lying,
right.
Not just to the people, but to the outside world as well. Well, this is the perfect transition to talk about your work for your thought catalog, because you contribute essays to thought catalog, kind of a combination of pop cultural observations and observations on issues like this, North Korea, political issues, and this is the perfect opportunity to mention Jim Goad.
Who my editor.
Who I have to say, aside from...
I'm meeting him this week.
Perfect. Aside from Gavin McInnes and the Derb Radio Derb, the John Derbyshire, his is probably the only thing on Taki Mag that I enjoy reading.
Well, you're familiar with his background.
Well, great. I want to bring that up. If you read his Wikipedia page and just scroll through the Wikipedia page and assume that maybe 30 or 40% of it is accurate, he's lived one of the most insane lives of any human being on the planet. And I would love to just kind of pick your brain, since you actually do know him personally. Is his life as bizarre as he's portrayed it in his...
He just got a metal plate put in his head, and of course he got a staph infection in his head. So I think that's your answer.
Well, his memoir is called Shit Magnet.
Correct. Have you read it?
One of his. I haven't read it, but based on the title, I can imagine it's...
Oh, yeah, the subtitle is something like One Man's Ability to Accept the World's Crap, or something like that. The book is very interesting because he was married and he was having an affair, and then the wife got cancer, and the woman he's having the affair with was, as he portrays her, just literally completely insane and was trying to break up his marriage and constantly violent with him in public and screaming, and at one point he just hit her back, and then because of that he went to jail for 3 years. It's this very... he has lived a very... any kind of transgressive magazine stuff, he's kind of started, or he was certainly instrumental. His zine was called Answer Me. It ran for 4 issues, and the 4th issue, which is the one who got him legal trouble, was called The Rape Issue, and he did it with his wife. And the other ones, they just talk on all the things like incest, the Klan, the Holocaust, all the things that by now everyone knows is just trolling and everyone's hot button issues. But back then, I think this was the early 90s, people, before the internet, people regarded it as like, this man must be put down.
So this was sort of the apex of PC culture, campus speech codes, all of the...
It wasn't campus. I mean, this was a zine, so you have
No, but I'm saying just the general atmosphere was...
This is when Tipper Gore was having warning labels on CDs, because otherwise rap lyrics are going to turn children into rapists. So this was that era.
So was it designed specifically in order to
you have to ask him. I don't know.
A finger to the culture, or was it just?
It clearly was a finger to the culture. In fact, I think on one of the covers, someone's giving the finger to the reader. So yeah, he's very much in that vein. Now he's kind of toned it down a little bit as he's gotten a little older. He has a kid, but you'd have to ask him about that. I get on with him royally.
So how did this your working relationship with him arise? How did you actually start writing?
Well, I'm the opposite of Jim, because when I was in the book 6-word memoirs, where you had to write your memoir in 6 words, mine was good things happen to bad people. So I've always had a very charmed life, and even though I'm not deserving, I've had a series of wonderful things happen to me. So my buddy Ryan Holiday, who's an author who wrote Trust Me, I'm Lying, and he just came out with another book called The Obstacle Is the Way, he introduced me to the head of Thought Catalog at Ryan's book party, and we got on. He goes, I'd love to have you write for us, and there's certain editors, and this is Jim Goad, and I'm like, oh my God, like I know who Jim Goad is. Yes, it was just such a fortuitous, weird coincidence, and it's a great.
So what is his role at Thought Catalog?
They call him content producer, but he's basically an editor.
So he gets to decide what is published, or he.
I guess. I mean, I can only speak for me. He just edits anything I send him and puts it up. And
how, what sort of, I mean, what inspires you to write about certain things other than your work as a writer? I remember one of the Thought Catalog pieces was, I believe, advice on writers who complain about their agents.
Oh yes, because I was complaining about I had fired an agent, and I realized you feel guilty as an author when you don't like your agent, because not that long ago, when you were just aspiring, if I only get an agent, I'll be happy all the time, and that's never how it works out. So I just wanted to give people who were in the same position I was permission that it's okay to think this person's terrible.
That's interesting. I wonder, how has the self-publishing route worked for you? Because I know that Dear Reader has actually been, you've described it as extremely successful, more so than you anticipated when you...
I wouldn't say extremely, but very,
okay,
yes.
very successful, more successful than you anticipated.
Yes.
When you began the project.
Yes.
Do you think the things like Kickstarter and IndieGoGo, these collaborative online ventures that help people to kind of bypass publishing companies or movie houses, that has destigmatized the doing something on your own without the but because I remember having a conversation about your book, and the moment I mentioned it was self-published, even though I had said that this person had been published repeatedly, had lots of books to his name, the person I mentioned to, he looked askance at the idea of reading something that didn't have the imprimatur of Houghton Mifflin, sure, or Harcourt, one of these large book publishing houses. So, I mean, do you think we've kind of surpassed that?
Well, obviously not if he's looking askance, right?
No, but I mean for... well, do you think that we're in some sort of transitional stage where these publishing houses are having less eventually they'll have less clout about what's accessible to the public from talented writers?
I think what happened with music industry, which is, you remember, I'm sure, when we were kids, there was The Wiz and there was Sam Goody, and you had CD stores all over the place, and now you can't buy CDs anywhere, but somehow music keeps getting produced, and it's going to be the same thing with publishing. The bookstores are going to go away, other than, independent bookstores and used bookstores, and you're going to have plenty more content to be creative, and if someone wants to look askance, that's okay. My rent's getting paid, and people are learning about North Korea by reading my book. And again, I think it'd be different if it's my first book, because if it's someone's first book, there's the impression that this person is a fraud. But once you have,
that they haven't been vetted properly.
Right. Once you have 5 or 6 under your belt, and you actually, write at the highest levels with people, then, this is obviously sometimes when something's quirky and one-off, it's a different situation.
But it seems like, as an example, the Hachette dispute, it seems like the people who do run publishing houses do see themselves as indispensable, much like the music industry, the large record companies thought themselves as indispensable, that they will never, that you can't do away with them, that people will not have access to art if you do away with the middleman. What do you think inspires that sort of mentality?
I think everyone wants to be part of the in-crowd. I think everyone who writes for, let's say, the New York Times is genuinely convinced that all those opinion columnists, that they're brilliant and insightful. And maybe at one point they were brilliant and insightful, but the idea that even if someone is brilliant and insightful, therefore everything they produce is brilliant and insightful is false. So it might be true that for certain types of books, those publishers aren't going anywhere. I think it's very true, like for celebrity books, because that's something that's about distribution. It's about big names. A celebrity's not going to want to produce his own book. He's going to want to go through, have that imperator of Simon Schuster or whatnot.
And they have a built-in audience.
Right. But when you are doing something that's innovative, there's been a long history of people who are innovative, producing their own work. And I think the Kickstarter takes away from that, because that's kind of proof of concept. That means, X amount of people were willing to contribute money to bring this object into being. So that shows that this isn't, some crackpot in his attic, like Hamilton Fish in his later years, cranking out, self-published books about unilateral disarmament.
Yeah, you're not handing them out on the Staten Island ferry. Correct. To annoyed commuters.
Right. And I'm not, kind of these. What's that guy's name? Chappaquiddick 1 nuclear.
Chappaquiddick 1.
There's this. Who's the perennial Democratic candidate, who's basically a fascist?
Oh, Lyndon LaRouche.
Yeah, right. I'm not a Lyndon LaRouche type, and I think
working it out on your own.
Yeah, mimeograph. Yes,
your basement.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, I think that's an astute observation, but that mentality is prevalent among a certain class of people, not just the New York Times, but people. It's kind of epitomized by the press correspondence dinner, where you see all of these journalists fawning on celebrities and politicians, and this just kind of disgusting, incestuous circle of people who consider themselves, and justifiably so, part of the elite, the opinion makers and shapers that everyone else has to bow down to. Whatever sort of opinion is de facto the soi disant opinion. They have to accept it because it's been printed on the editorial page of the New York Times or repeated by Brian Williams. Do you think that that sort of opinion in politics that will persist? Because I know you're a not so subtle Hillary Clinton backer.
Correct.
But you're also an anarcho-capitalist. How do you reconcile the two?
Well, I would say anarchist, not anarcho-capitalist.
Oh, anarchist.
I'm a Hillary Clinton supporter because I think she's particularly incompetent. and she has no idea why she wants to be president anymore. She's made this Faustian bargain, and I just think, just as a lover of drama, watching this Nixon figure twisting in the wind, it will just be a great, beautiful thing.
I like the comparison to Nixon, because I've always thought of Hillary Clinton as the, forgive me because my comic book knowledge is severely deficient, but I've always thought of her as kind of a bizarro Richard Nixon. She has none of the political skills
Right.
of Richard Nixon, who was an extremely successful politician, and he could connect with the American public. She has none of that, but she has all of the paranoia and pettiness and all of the character flaws that ultimately doomed Richard Nixon's presidency.
Right.
So you think she would be good? She would be the ideal candidate because of those reasons. Do you think she'll also undermine people's faith in government?
I think it's hard to undermine faith in anything, but she'll certainly undermine people's faith in several things, in the electoral process, in feminism, in milquetoast double talk. I mean, I think everything she touches is just she's a walking calamity, and I call her America's mother-in-law, because all she does is just scold people, and no one likes to scold. So I think I think she'll be very receptive to selling out her. I always thought of her as this kind of doctrinaire, hardcore leftist, but seeing how easily she's dropped her opinions, trying to, pathetically, I think, be a mirror image of her husband and do what he does, and having no talent for it whatsoever. How quickly she'll just be throwing any of her principles under the bus. I mean, there's no question at this point. I think that she's not literally insane, because she had her life's plan mapped out since Yale, and that was going to end with her following Bill Clinton to the White House. And when 2008 that didn't happen, I don't think she had a plan B. And now she's going off script, and this woman's not good at improv, and frankly, no one's that good at improv, because improv's terrible. So, I mean, that's what we're kind of going to be seeing and whenever she goes off script, it's things like "we were dead broke," or accusing Terry Gross of being a covert Republican operative, or saying, as First Lady, she was a sniper fighter.
Or trying to pantomime the working class.
Right, and her accent changes constantly, yeah.
Well, yeah, or becoming a black Southern preacher when she visits a Baptist church in South Carolina.
My big fear is that since she's going to have no opposition, she's going to put her foot in her mouth so much over the next year and a half that the Republicans wipe the floor with her. That's my big fear.
But don't you think she has so many built-in demographic advantages that she would need? No?
No, I think these people will sit home, especially because she's so good at alienating everyone. I hope she gets in, but I'm not too optimistic about it, sadly, because nothing good ever happens in politics. So,
I've always been amused by the feminist Hillary Clinton supporters who, and this was the argument made repeatedly throughout maybe not the entire Clinton presidency, but throughout the early 90s, that her political career was being hamstrung by Bill Clinton. In other words, if she had not hitched her wagon to Bill Clinton, she would have become the first female president, or perhaps a Supreme Court justice, or the sky's the limit. To me,
she's the smartest woman who's ever lived.
To me, this just always seemed very delusional.
And America's a meritocracy, so therefore she'd be running Apple. She'd be the female Steve Jobs, because she's so smart at everything and so brilliant. I can't think of one smart thing she's ever said or one accomplishment to her name, but clearly she's brilliant because reasons.
And Bill Clinton was hamstringing her because he was just this big galoof who
got elected twice.
Yeah, who got elected in Arkansas as a liberal Democrat after the Reagan Revolution.
Right.
It all fits into place.
Yeah.
So you're not obviously you're not a fan of political solutions. So your advice to libertarians who still clung to the illusion that politics was a useful avenue to to change society or to bring along more people to their way of thinking, what would you say to them?
We just need to vote in the right people, right?
Yeah. It's a very reductive exercise.
We've been having these arguments since the French Revolution. The arguments aren't changing. The only thing that needs to change is the ability of people to impose their perspective on your life. That's the only thing that has had any sort of change.
So it's a philosophical revolution?
No, it's a technical one. It's like, technically, how do you stop these people from having their cockamamie ideas and having that affect your life?
So things like Uber, for example, ride-sharing services, or anything that sort of circumvents the infrastructure, like Bitcoin.
Sure.
I know could you explain why you're such a big proponent of Bitcoin as an alternative currency?
I'm not.
Or you're not but you're interested in it, conceptually, sure, at least.
Sure.
The idea that people can use it, can sort of could have multiple currencies that don't rely upon
government fiat. Yeah.
Yeah. But you're not a fan.
I'm a fan. I mean, whatever works. I haven't seen it working particularly well, but I mean, I'm no Jeff Tucker. I'm not a Bitcoin expert.
Excuse me. So, but you do think that technology will? Do you think it will render the government obsolete, or would just lessen the extent or reach of the state?
Well, I think government is obsolete, but I mean, I think it's a function of, that's the only thing that seems to have been working. You know, if you back in 1981, used to be clutching at pearls that people would tape songs off the radio on their cassettes, and now you can find any album. You know, the albums are leaked before they actually released in the stores, so even if you want to pay for them, you can't. So, and governments are railing and flipping out, and they shut down the Pirate Bay in Sweden, and the consequences of that were nil. People had to update their bookmarks, which took them 1 second. So technology is the only thing that's been effective at stopping the ability of the state to, impose things in people's lives. But I mean, it's still a very long way to go, and it's been very limited in its effectiveness.
But you just pointed out that the states, government institutions, they're very reactionary. It's almost like they're fighting a rear guard action against people, right, who actually are innovators. So they have the foresight to create things that will circumvent the state.
Yeah, one of the greatest things that's happened in the last year, I'm shocked, this would never have happened 5 years ago, is Apple had something on their new phone that the cops can't get in even if they want to. That Apple can't have a backdoor for the cops. And the idea that you'd have a built-in feature for a consumer to defy the government is so transgressive, and I can't believe they did it. And again, imagine 5 years, or during the Bush era, if Apple tried to do this, it would be, the hue and cry would be enormous.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of a universal principle, because I was just reminded of this, the recent case of the Russian spies who were apprehended, and they were using TASS in order to allegedly commit economic espionage. And the Soviet Union and Russia, it's been trying to penetrate the U.S. for decades, for over half a century, and they haven't had any sort of success, with a few notable exceptions, since the beginning of the atomic age, when the Manhattan Project was cracked. And yet the government there is still pouring money into essentially a black hole, even though there's no benefit. Now, there must be people inside the Russian government, or previously the Soviet government, who tried to convince the Politburo that this was a waste of money, and yet it persisted. That seems to me to be kind of an eternal feature of government. They don't really look at things that are staring them in the face and accept them. They just try to find another way of relying on the same idea, trying to, whether it's extracting taxes or continuing a program that's completely and utterly useless, things like that.
I mean, how many series of Hawkman has DC Comics done? They keep bringing it back, and it lasts for 18 issues. Then, like 3 years later, it's Hawkman #1 again. And it's like, you know, they're sitting around a table. It's like, what are we going to do? Well, have you thought about Hawkman? Okay, let's bring back Hawkman. And I'm sure it's the same thing in Russia. It's like, this worked once. This is how we got the atom bomb. Well,
This worked in 1944.
Right. Well, that's when Hawkman was popular, actually. Flash Comics was during the World War II. Same exact thing. It's like, let's try it again. So, I mean, they don't have
Maybe
a plan B.
they'll hit gold one of these days.
Yeah, maybe someday Hawkman will be the latest craze. Because he can fly unlike any other superhero.
Wait, so
that's the joke.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's funny you mentioned that, because I did not read a lot of comic books growing up, but you are a comic book aficionado and very well versed in the subject. What do you think of...
Well, I am a comic book character.
Good point. Harvey Pekar depicted you in your first... Well, it wasn't. It was his book, but you were the central character from the beginning of your, more or less the beginning of your childhood, all the way up until, I guess your 30s, about
late 20s, yeah.
Late 20s, when you finally started to hit pay dirt, career-wise. Can you explain how that relationship came about between you and Harvey Pekar?
Sure. I wrote a screenplay that never got produced about a band from the 80s, and the keyboard player from the band got an email from the producer of the film that said, Harvey's in town with nothing to do. If you want to hang out with him, now's your chance. And no one at the film company took him up on it besides me. And I met him, and we hit it off immediately. And I don't know what it is, but it was one of the great relationships of my life.
Was it because of common interests, or because he was such a compelling personality, or did you just really admire his work as an artist?
I can't speak for what he saw in me. I'm very honored and flattered that he did see something special in me. What I saw in him was just, I mean, he was a real mensch. He was a real good...
He was a decent person?
Very, very good guy with no ego whatsoever, unlike myself. And just really friendly. And I mean, I think he lived a pretty isolated life. And he was just really kind of a... I mean, if people crossed him, he definitely had a vindictive side, which I can certainly appreciate. But we just got on. I think there was just a lot of resentment at how the world works, and we kind of bonded on that.
Well, he began, not really a protege, but he was influenced by R. Crumb.
Well, they're best friends, yeah,
yeah,
for a while.
To a large extent. So, I mean, the alternative, he was one of the kind of the pioneers of the alternative comic scene.
We were in talks with Crumb to draw Ego and Hubris, which would have been a very different book.
How so? I mean, what would the differences have been like? Just
if R. Crumb drew me, I think I would look a little different than how Gary Dunn drew me.
But I mean, in terms of the narrative, it would have been the same, right?
I don't know. I think part of comic books is the visual, and then when you have every character depicted as an ogre in their R. Crumb style, it's going to have a very different feel to it than Gary Dumm's kind of clean, realist line, not realistic, like cartoonish line work.
But would you still been portrayed as the hero of your own life in that sense? Because that's one of the things about Ego and Hubris that I really admire. Because you read some of the reviews on Amazon or Goodreads, and you have, with all due respect, you have just people laying into you saying, "Oh, this guy's a conceited jerk." I don't know I don't know why. But if you actually read the book and some of your encounters between you and authority figures, parents or bosses, there aren't that many scenes. Not that you're a blameless, flawless person, but there aren't that many scenes where you can look at the encounter and come to the conclusion that Michael Malice is in the wrong. He's just more direct and forward about voicing opinions that, when you come down to it, are right.
I genuinely think that most people have given in at a very early age to, I don't know about cynicism, but moral cowardice. And when they see someone who acts another way and is actually, because they think, if I act in this way, I'm going to be destroyed and my life's ruined and I have to pay my rent. So when they see someone who's acting in the opposite manner and actually not only surviving but thriving, which implies that everything they've been doing was a lie, and they're selling their soul for what? Some desk job. I think that really threatens their sense of self and ego, and the fact that I'm so smug and condescending about it certainly doesn't help.
So they're motivated by fear, in other words.
I think they're motivated by guilt.
Guilt at the fact that someone else is expressing what they know to be true. And
no, guilt at the fact that they put their money on the wrong roulette.
Bet on the wrong horse.
Yeah, and now it's too late, and it's just like, it didn't have to be that way.
Well, it's interesting because I kind of got the sense during the Charlie Hebdo, the post-massacre controversy, you saw these people who would print articles condemning Charlie Hebdo from the West. I'm not talking about muftis or people who were condemning it from an Islamic perspective, but people who were condemning it from the West. And I think a lot of it was motivated in a sense by people who were kind of shamed that there were individuals who were bold enough to actually tell the truth and risk their lives in the truth while they were kind of masquerading almost as a burlesque of journalism, and yet they weren't doing journalism. They were kind of cowering in fear.
Well, I think it's we see that in this country with how, since we were kids, people are much more respectful of the police and venerate them. And when we were children, the police were not held to be these great, great heroes, and we should bow down and genuflect. And
but
I think,
you did have things
let me
like,
finish.
Sorry.
I think as we're getting older, people are becoming more fearful of the police because the police are acting more obnoxiously. But they're not going to say, I'm becoming more scared and becoming more cowardly. Their mind is going to translate that into, I need to be respectful of this person. So I think the human, idea of, I have to convince myself that I'm a certain type of personality, when in actuality I'm, to quote Thatcher, weak, feeble, is very strong impulse.
In human nature.
Yeah.
You're saying this is a universal quality to a certain extent. You mentioned Thatcher. You were a big admirer of Margaret Thatcher. Who was the Thatcher era coincides to a certain extent with Ronald Reagan and Helmut Kohl, although they approach things somewhat differently. Can you explain where that admiration stems from? Oh,
I can tell you in 2 sentences. There's this quote from her, Thatcher, which she says, I'm going to paraphrase, I don't remember, she goes, in the 1970s, Britain was built on the idea that both political parties would sit down, put their ideas forward, hash it out, and reach a consensus. I came to change all that. And that, to me, encapsulates everything you need to know and to admire about Margaret Thatcher, that she was willing to give the finger to half the country.
She was an iconoclast in a lot of ways, because, the Conservative Party in Britain back then was sort of a milquetoast.
It was like the Rockefeller Republicans.
It was a milquetoast imitation of Labor. We're going to arrest the spread of socialism by letting socialism spread more slowly. Where we don't dispute the general idea that the state should control the economy, that the free market should be hampered. We're just niggling over the details, in other words.
Right, managed decline.
Managed decline. And this was something that Ayn Rand also was, she wrote and spoke about endlessly during her life. This idea that you can't have a mixture of capitalism and socialism. A managed economy is just kind of a stopgap measure on the way to full-blown socialism where the state has control of your life.
Well, Rand's been proven false because it's been 100 years since Woodrow Wilson and we're still doing okay. So maybe it's inevitable, but we don't know what the time frame is.
How did her writing influence your thinking?
Is this a good time for a rape joke? How did it influence my thinking? I think Rand does not have all the answers, but she has all the questions. And I think one of the most important things that she has about her is the idea that just because there's a consensus where an idea is popular, it has no bearing on its veracity. And I think that's a very, very useful thing for people to appreciate and understand. And most people are very threatened by that idea because from their perspective, we've all come to a consensus on this. Why are we still arguing about this? I know what to think.
Yeah, they think you're litigating the point when you bring up something that's true, that it hasn't worked. It's like in England, people have bought into the idea of a national health service. Therefore, anyone who tries to raise the question of whether socialized medicine is a good idea is a heretic and therefore to be condemned.
Right. And destroyed personally, and they must have some kind of ulterior motive.
Yeah, they can't be motivated by principle. They have to have some sort of pecuniary interest or
working from hate.
Or working from hate. That's another thing that you've seen recently. People whose motives are, people will cast aspersions on the motives of a particular person rather than, it's a logical fallacy, but basically this person is wrong if they advocate a free market alternative because they're bankrolled by the Koch brothers or they. Well,
it goes both ways. I mean, when National Review is attacking Hillary Clinton for her speaking fees, which she's earned on a free market, how is that? I don't see what's wrong with her getting her money or getting her huge book deals when her first book sold, or second book rather, her autobiography, sold 1 million copies in the first month. Who would begrudge her getting that big advance? And apparently, if it's Hillary Clinton, therefore it's evil and wrong. I think it's the same exact phenomenon on the right.
In terms of party politics,
yeah,
they'll attack someone for engaging in the same behavior that someone they admire.
And some kind of behavior that they champion. Go write a book that people will buy and earn money by it. She did that. What's the problem?
Which brings us back to Hillary Clinton. Well, just before we wrap up, I want to ask you if you have any upcoming projects you'd like to promote, or just give us something that you might be doing in 2015 that we might keep an eye out for.
I guess just my Twitter, my Facebook, all that
What's
stuff.
your Facebook?
It's Michael Malice for both. Easy to remember. Malice by name, Malice by nature.
And that's also, your website is michaelmalice.com.
I haven't updated that in a long time.
But it has pictures of succulents, though.
But those are all outdated. Those my current succulent pictures.
But the people who haven't heard of your website don't know that yet.
But my current succulent pictures are my Instagram.
Okay. What's your Instagram?
Take a guess.
Yes.
That's right. It's what's Odd Lane.
Odd Lane. Yes, that's. It's an anagram. I don't want to explain it, but yeah, my Twitter handle is Odd Lane. His is Michael Malice, and you'll be able to find this interview on AmericanRattlesnake.org as well as other venues that I'll be disclosing in the future. This is my indoor voice.
I know. I mean, it's a secret.
Oh,
you
okay.
said I'll be disclosing. The crow flies at midnight.
Too witty for me. Anyway, Michael, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Gerard. Me too.
Bye.